Good morning this morning. My name is Edward Wasrom, the tutor in Edis Academy or Edis Econometrics Knowledge Hub. This morning I will bring to you a fascinating development in macroeconometrics. I'll bring to you what we call the Granger Causality text. The essence of actually looking at it this morning is because too many persons misunderstand the Granger text with the Granger Causality text. The Granger Causality text is only applied when researchers try to actually elicit the relationship that exists between or among macroeconomic variables. Recall that the Johansen cointegration output results establishes either the presence of a co-integrating relationship or the absence of co-integrating relationship, and that whenever a co-integrating relationship or convergence is being established given the trace and the mass against statistics in Johansen framework, that we actually proceed to estimate the vacuum or the ECM. And when there is no co-integrating relationship, we now proceed to estimate the VAR. So actually, if the study objective of the researcher is to actually look at the relationship that exists among or between variables, and the researchers have done the Johansen text established that there is no co-integrating relationship, the researcher will estimate VAR and go to VAR Granger causality. But if there is at least one co-integrating relationship or more, the researcher is expected to actually estimate the pairwise Granger causality text, because the pairwise Granger causality text enables us to actually know if there is a unidirectional or bidirectional causality running from the dependent variable and the independent variable, whereas the VAR Granger causality only establishes the presence of a unidirectional causality. So at this point, I will proceed to my eView worksheet where I will be exposing to you how to run each of these causality texts. So back to my eView worksheet. This is the eView worksheet I used previously. Recall that the last class when where I estimated VAR, I actually adopted a study approach wherein we are looking at how capital market variables affect economic growth in Nigeria. And to have that estimated, assuming that the Johansen outcome or output actually establishes the presence of at least one or more co-integrating relationship, then the researcher will be expected to perform the pairwise Granger causality. So to proceed, you go to quick, you maneuver to group statistics, you move to Granger causality. Quick, group statistics, Granger causality. Quick, group statistics, Granger causality. Then you specify your variable. Remember that I specified this. RGDP, NCAP, ND, veterans, and interest rates. Exactly what I specified previously. If you hit OK, you are going to be exposed to a result that looks like this. This is how a Granger causality outcome or output comes. I'll copy it neatly to a Microsoft Word where I will be offering reasonable interpretation. So we'll drop it here. I will drop it here. I will drop my result here. So this is the output, the pairwise Granger causality estimated this day, 31st day of July 2023. So the null hypothesis is that a market capitalization does not Granger cause RGDP. Remember that null hypotheses are always presented in null form. So this hypothesis can be accepted if the p-value of the F statistics is more than 5%. But if the p-value of the F statistics is less than 5%, this hypothesis will be rejected. In this case, we can now reject the hypothesis because the p-value is less than 5%. We can now conclude that market capitalization causes Granger causes RGDP in Nigeria. That means that market capitalization stimulates economic growth in Nigeria. That assertion is accepted. The null hypothesis is accepted. So it's rejected, while the alternative hypothesis is accepted. In the second result, we can now conclude that ROGDP does not Granger cause market capitalization because the p-value is above 5%. This hypothesis is accepted. Yes, we agree with the estimation that ROGDP is not the cause of market capitalization index. Increase in ROGDP does not stimulate MCAP in Nigeria. This hypothesis, this statement is being accepted because the p-value is more than 5%. In the first output, we can now conclude that there is a unidirectional or one-way causality running from market capitalization to ROGDP. That is the conclusion of the first output, that a one-way causality exists running from market cap to ROGDP. In the second output, we can also accept the fact that number of deal does Granger cause ROGDP because the null hypothesis is being rejected while the alternative hypothesis is being accepted. Why? Because the p-value here is less than 5%. And since the p-value is less than 5%, we conclude that a unidirectional or a one-way causality runs from number of deals to ROGDP in Nigeria within the period 1981 to 2021. In the third one, we can also conclude that veterans does Granger cause ROGDP because the p-value is less than 5%. We now conclude that a one-way Granger causality or a unidirectional causality exists between the veterans and ROGDP in Nigeria since the p-value is less than 5%. Whereas we can now conclude that there is no causality running from ROGDP to veterans, just like when we say there is no causality running from ROGDP to number of deals. In the fourth result, we conclude that interest rate does not Granger cause ROGDP. Yes, we accept this hypothesis because the p-value here is above 5%. Interest rate does not Granger cause ROGDP. Why we also reject this hypothesis because the p-value is more than 5%. We conclude that ROGDP Granger causes interest rates. That means that change in economic growth is a determinant or stimulant to the movement in interest rates. Okay, if we actually look at other results, we also can conclude that market cap Granger causes number of deals. A one-way causality runs from market cap to number of deals in the transaction in the market. So that is what we actually have been able to generate. But if you go further to this other output, we now realize that a bidirectional causality exists between value of transaction and number of deals. That means that a value of transaction Granger causes number of D and number of D Granger causes value of transaction because the p-values for each of these particular outputs are all less than 5%. So we conclude that a bidirectional causality runs amongst them. So this is how we actually interpret Granger causality texts and use them for policy making at all time. So let me go back to my eView portal to estimate the VAR causality text. Recall that for you to estimate the VAR Granger causality test, you must have estimated the VAR output. So to have that done, I go to estimate VAR. I will now come to my endogenous variable bus. I specify my variables: log value of ROGDP, log value of market capitalization, the log of number of transaction and deal, the log of value of transaction veteran, the log of value of transaction and interest rate. Okay, assuming that the log length is 2, it proceeds without changing anything. You hit the OK button, you'll be exposed to a result that looks like this. This is your VAR result. Then you go to view, you go to log structure, you maneuver to Granger causality. This is your VAR result. I'll copy it neatly to a PowerPoint or a Microsoft Word where I will be looking at it one after the other. In this result, we actually conclude in the first equation. Remember, in the var framework, all the variables are endogenous. This is the equation of ROGDP. In this equation, we assume that we are trying to actually estimate or elicit how each of these variables actually Granger causes ROGDP. And looking at market capitalization index, the p-value is less than 5%. And since the p-value is less than 5%, we can now conclude that a one-way causality runs from market capitalization to ROGDP, or that market capitalization stimulates ROGDP, or we can also say that we have a unidirectional causality running from market capitalization to ROGDP, while in other hypotheses so stated, because the p-values are all more than 5%, we can now conclude that there are no causality running from end-deal veterans and interest rates to ROGDP. That means that number of deal, value of transition, interest rate does not Granger cause ROGDP in Nigeria within the period under investigation. Okay. Then let's look at if you are looking at it from 5%. But if you are looking at it from 10%, we can actually accept the fact that Granger causality runs from number of transaction, value of transaction to ROGDP if we are looking at it at 10%. And cumulatively, if you look at the summary of the ROGDP model, we can now conclude that there is a Granger causality moving from the stock market variables as a whole to ROGDP, since majority of the probability values became stationary at 5% and at 10%. At that level, we conclude that stock market variables actually Granger causes ROGDP in Nigeria, and at that level we can say a unidirectional causality moved from stock market variables to ROGDP or to economic growth in Nigeria. That can be accepted if you are modeling your interpretation on 10% and 5%. Okay, if you come to market capitalization equation, there is no causality because the p-values are all more than 5%. If you come to number of deal, you observe that there is no causality because the majority of the p-values are more than 5%, irrespective of the general specification. So all other estimated models do not have causality on the dependent variable. So this is how we estimate the pairwise and Granger causality outputs. Thank you for staying. Thank you for viewing. And thank you for subscribing to my channel. Please stay tuned. In my next video, I will bring to you how to place restrictions on structural VAL and also how to specify structural VAL equations. Thank you and God bless you.